All right, and we are live. Uh, and it looks like we just had Leslie join.
Okay,
Great.
sorry.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and welcome to our virtual Valley City Managers panel held by the Maddie Institute. My name is Blake Zanti. I'm the Executive Director of the Maddie Institute. We're very grateful to all of you for joining who are watching us live, and also to our esteemed guests who are here with us today. The Maddie Institute is a nonpartisan public policy institute that was established by the California legislature in honor of Senator Ken Maddie. The Institute is affiliated with Fresno State, UC Merced, CSU Stanislaus, CSU Bakersfield, and most recently the State Center Community College District. We're grateful to our university and community college partners for their continued support of our programs. Today's conversation is titled Behind the Scenes, Making Local Government Work. We're grateful to have all of our city managers with us for this important conversation about the challenges and opportunities in local government throughout the San Joaquin Valley. To those of us who are joining us from when this event was rescheduled a couple of months ago, thank you again for being here, and we apologize for the interruption previously. I'd also like to thank our Maddie Associates for their continued support. Our Maddie Associates are key donors and supporters of the Institute who help us continue our work. Now, without further delay, let's go ahead and get started because we have a lot of ground to cover. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guests today, Leslie Caviglia, City Manager of Visalia, Christian Clegg, City Manager of Bakersfield, and Georgeanne White, City Manager of Fresno. Each of these leaders brings a wealth of experience and perspective, and we're excited to hear their insights today. So let's get started. Thank you all again for being with us today. We really appreciate your time. I want to talk about the current challenges that are going on in city management. We'll start with the maybe the hard-hitting questions first, and then we can get started. So why don't we just start off? This is a very open-ended question, but what are the biggest challenges facing your city today? And Georgeanne, why don't we start with you?
I think if you would have asked me this question at our previously scheduled session, I would have had a different answer than I do today. And I think today, in real time for us, it's part of it has been navigating the Trump executive orders. Cities depend tremendously on federal funding. We receive hundreds of millions of dollars every year in federal funding. And these dollars are now being conditioned with compliance with the executive orders that Trump has issued with regard to immigration enforcement and DEI initiatives. And I know specifically complying with the Trump executive order on immigration would as a result have us be violating law in California. So I'm trying to navigate through all of the documentation coming from the federal government for those dollars has been extremely challenging. And the thought of turning away tax dollars that have been returned to us from the federal government that is going to have tremendous impact on certainly on our city has been very worrisome.
Thank you, Georgeanne. Why don't we turn to Leslie on that question? What are the biggest challenges that you're facing?
So similarly, it's just all of the state and federal regulations that we have to comply with. Sometimes they're competing or even almost polar opposite. Certainly the newer ones that we're facing this year, but just in general, there are so many state and federal regulations. It begins to feel like a gotcha that you're going to miss something. We're all human, and then what? And then how does that impact your ability to attract housing financing and transit financing and down the road? The other thing I would say in addition to that is just the angst in society. It is just difficult for the politicians and for the staff, and just I think for people in general, it just seems like it's not a happy time, and it hasn't been kind of since COVID. I think it's a long-term thing. I'm worried about the mental health impacts of that on us all.
Thank you, Leslie. And Christian, why don't we turn to you? What are the biggest challenges that the city of Bakersfield is experiencing?
I would agree with all the challenges that have already been raised. We're facing similar issues, and I think a big piece of the challenge for us around sort of that polarity of policy and new policies coming from the federal government, it's a level of uncertainty. It's hard to plan and it's hard to implement good strategies when we just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, or when you are, kind of between a rock and a hard place of some of these polarities. Beyond those factors, I would also just point to the fiscal challenges that I think that the inflationary impacts are having for us. Our revenues are just not keeping up with the rise in the cost of doing business, and so budgets are just much tighter. And when that's exacerbated by reductions in state funding or reductions in federal funding, while that inflation is hitting us, budgets are just tighter than they've been in the last 5 years. I mean, even frankly, even tighter overall than some of the COVID years, at least specific to Bakersfield. And then beyond that, I would just point a little bit to some of our state and even national challenges around what I wouldn't call just homelessness, but I would sort of call our accountability systems. We have increased our ability over the last few years in our city to have better enforcement. We've focused a little bit on differential responses within law enforcement to support individuals who may be experiencing substance use or mental health, but also our ability to address the impacts that are caused on our community. But on the back end, there's not the same level of support in whether it's even in, if necessary, the criminal justice system, but also our treatment systems for mental health, our treatment systems for substance use. And those aren't necessarily within city jurisdiction typically. And so we're relying on the counties or the state to provide those services. And we try to make a big impact at the local level, and we don't have the same level of accountability and support on the back end. And it's become a big frustration point for us. And we try to work with our partners, but it's not totally within our control. And that's been a challenge.
Thank you for that. It sounds like all of you are dealing with similar challenges, and a theme that I heard there that was common was navigating the state and federal environments that are just simply always having an impact on city governments while they're trying to deliver basic services to their residents. And it also sounds like in your answer, Christian, that you talked about jurisdiction, and it seems like maybe today that cities are expected to do more, right? There's more with less. And that is also an increasing challenge that seems to be occurring, especially here in the Central Valley. That kind of transitions to our next question on how are you all addressing issues such as housing, infrastructure, and economic development in your respective cities? And why don't we start with you, Christian?
So you kind of mentioned, Valley cities, having to shift a little bit. And I think that is true for us. And I think increasingly as the pressures on the coasts and the urban centers are, pushing more people towards the Valley, we're happy to welcome new family and friends to our community, but also, changes some of our dynamics. And we're increasingly becoming urban centers, whereas, for a long time, I think many Valley cities were able to keep a little more of that small town feel. As urban centers, we have to address infrastructure, we have to address housing and even economic development a little bit different than we did in the past. And so, we're doing a lot more regional planning. We've looked to the success of Fresno as having more regional economic development plans, over the last decade, by comparison to what we've done, at the southern end of the valley here in Bakersfield. And so we're being much more thoughtful and strategic in how we're doing economic development, because it's not just going to sort of happen on its own to the degree that we need it to. We're having to be much more intentional. Similar with housing, we've started building more variety of different types of housing. Our housing element, our general plan, while the state is pushing in some of those areas, we also have just been going there ourselves because we need to create that missing middle housing stock that we haven't really had in Bakersfield, and creating some higher densities, but also doing it in a way that can create sense of place and create options for folks. So I would, if I could categorize it in a general sense, it's carefully creating policies that help us urbanize, but in a way that fits the character and values of our community.
Thank you. And maybe Leslie, if you could give us a Visalia perspective, how are you addressing issues like housing, infrastructure, and economic development?
We are blessed in Visalia. We have had generations of really good leadership and very consistent growth policies and just a well-planned community. So we're really benefiting from that now. We know that we need housing in order to drive the job market, and so I think we're well positioned for that. Our industrial park has done very well because we have had some long-term planning, an EIR that incorporated the entire industrial park. And we're always all behind, I think, on the infrastructure because you're trying to build the roads and not before. You can't build it and they will come. We can't, at least, much of the time. So there's still some roads and so on that are going in, but our goal now and what we're working on is planning for the next generation to come and really putting those same policies and procedures. We'll start our new general plan next year with all the state regulations now and so on. We expect it'll take us a full 5 years in order to be able to complete that and have it in place. But you need that to then have the plans for the infrastructure. So it's that long-term approach of looking at the next 10 to 20 years. And we've been blessed to have had that in the past.
Thank you, Leslie. And Georgeanne, what about the city of Fresno? How are you addressing these issues?
I think on the housing front, we obviously were able to get our housing element compliant with state law, which was a big, huge, heavy lift for us, and super happy to be able to get that done. But we have in our 2035 general plan, really increased densities, reduced vehicle trips, and we have been in implementation mode on that plan for many, many years. And there's been some bumps along the road because at the end of the day, we still have a legislative body that is elected by the people, and when in implementing our plans, which require us to have higher densities in places that traditionally haven't had higher densities. We've been confronted with some of neighborhood opposition, and it's been a challenge because the staff's job is to implement the policies that our elected officials have adopted. And sometimes, residents get very frustrated and they think that, the staff, they're not listening to us. Well, it's the staff's job to implement adopted policy. It's the elected officials' job to determine whether they want to change those policies or make exceptions to those policies. And, we've had a couple pretty high profile projects that have come along that have been completely consistent with long-term planning efforts. And as a result of neighborhood opposition have been rejected. One of which has exposed us to litigation. And it's really, really hard to tell elected officials, don't listen to the people that elected you that don't want this project adjacent to them, even though state law is requiring us to do these certain things. So it's that continued, you'll hear the theme of the conflict with state and federal regulations of trying to, we're just on we're like on a balance beam and trying not to fall off. Sometimes we wobble. So I think on the housing front, we have spent a tremendous amount of time, energy, and money on affordable housing. Market rate housing, we think is going to be driven, by the market and by the economy. And so we do what we can to make sure that we're, making it as easy as possible for the private sector to go ahead and handle the market rate. But on the affordable housing, we have, spent a tremendous amount of resource. And the same thing, shelter beds on homelessness. We have gotten into the shelter bed business, which as a city has never really been our responsibility and our charge. But we now are funding and operating over 800 shelter beds in the city of Fresno. And the funding for those is going to be running out. at the state level. And the requirement for those are by the state is to convert those to permanent supportive housing. So housing, infrastructure, we've been very blessed, as people may have heard. We have been provided funding by the state of California for infrastructure in our downtown area. We just received another $100 million allocation from the state to help write down the cost of upgraded sewer and water and other infrastructure needs in downtown Fresno, which is our highest area of high density, right? Downtowns are traditionally built for high density, and we haven't had the infrastructure to support that high density. So we're helping to write the cost down for that. And then economic development, we just brought on a brand new economic development director. Same thing, trying to find what the right sweet spot for us for many, many years. It was logistics and distribution. And, we've had challenges in that area from environmental justice area advocates. So we are sitting back and taking another look. We just completed our comprehensive economic development strategy about a year ago, and we're looking at what all the feedback was for that to determine where we really need to focus our economic development efforts.
Thank you for that. Now, I kind of want to transition our conversation into growth and innovation in your cities. And we talked earlier about sort of doing more with less. And I think all of you have different ways of trying to be innovative in improving city services and developing new methods to help effectively run the city. What initiatives or policies have been particularly effective in improving city services? And Leslie, maybe we can start with you on this one.
It's what technology has enabled us to do just in general. I think you especially see that in police work. And, if it's flock cameras, it's body cams, police cams, how dispatch operates. Those are all technology changes that have made a huge difference in our response times and our ability to wrestle with issues that are important to our citizens. You're seeing the same thing though happen in the field of like solid waste, where now you can literally track every can that gets picked up. You know exactly where that truck has been. You can tell how long they stopped at a residence or a business if they stopped there. So for me, I think it's the technology across the board, even down to animals. Now they are chipped, and we just put up 3 chip stations in the city where people, if they find an animal, can go try and just scan it themselves if they want to do that. So I really think it's throughout the entire organization and all of our cities that we're seeing that kind of technology really make a difference.
And Georgeanne, what about you? Have you seen technology play a role in the city of Fresno in enhancing city services?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Leslie stated, especially in the police department, we have enjoyed partnerships with both Flock and Axon in being sort of test pilot cities for new technology. And so, we were an early implementer of, body-worn camera, the cameras, the Flock system cameras, and other technology. We are also working on a AI system within our city, specifically sort of shaped for city government to help our staff, write staff reports, look at contracts, things like that. So, and while keeping our information that is not necessarily public record within our own system and not being put out onto the technology world for everybody else to be able to grab onto. So, there's always a hesitation when you're dealing with a lot of confidential information, whether it be legal or personnel, of being able to use technology, but needing to keep things confidential. So that's been interesting. We also have really embraced volunteerism. Our Beautify Fresno initiative is going strong. You would not think that an effort that is based on volunteers going out year round, rain, sun, heat, would continue as robustly as the Beautify Fresno initiative has. And just the volume of trash that our community has gone out and picked up. And I think Visalia and Bakersfield, because it is shocking to me how many volunteers we get in Fresno from other communities that come in that have heard about our initiative and want to take, or they need service hours, or they want to take advantage of it. And it has really made a difference because we are able to track, and there has actually been a reduction in littering. So we go back and we track a location that we've done a Beautify Fresno initiative. We were there 2 years ago. We come back, we're picking up less pounds of trash. So that has really frees up city resources to focus on areas that are really not appropriate for volunteers to be in, and allows our city to reap the benefits of a community being really invested in what their community looks like and aspires to be.
Thanks for sharing that. And Christian, what about you? What sort of innovative policies or practices are helping improve city services with the city of Bakersfield?
I would just, lean into also the technology, topic. We've been underinvested in technology historically. We're spending a lot of money to get modernized in that space. But I think, to Georgeanne's point about even, tracking the data there, it's the data analytics that we're also getting, because technology gives us the ability to make much better decisions. We can really look at the data and understand the problems in ways that I don't think we could before. And you make good decisions if you have good data. And so really relying on that data is helping us. I would also just point to the fact that, one of the things I love about the public sector is it's very open source. And so we just go to, other cities and get the best ideas that they've had. And maybe that's not considered innovation, but in the purest sense. But, you want to find those evidence-based programs that have worked in other places. And every city might create one or two of those. But then for the other 20 you're working on, you go and grab the best ideas from other places that have proven to be successful. And if you have limited resources, you want to put them towards programs that have had some success. And so we've adopted several evidence-based programs that just shown good results in other spaces. I think an overarching principle that we've found to be helpful on some of these other ideas, though, is that you're just being willing to try something and being willing to say yes. And we raise our hand all the time and say, hey, state, you want to try a pilot? Think of us, and why not? I think the more we're willing to say yes, the more opportunities we have to try some different and innovative things.
I think that's a great transition into our next section here about collaboration and regional solutions. You mentioned, Georgeanne, that you're getting some volunteers from Visalia and Bakersfield, so maybe Visalia and Bakersfield need some volunteers from Fresno. We can send some folks there. But how do you work with other cities and counties? And, Christian, you mentioned even trying to work with the state on some pilot programs, and I saw a lot of head nodding from the others as well. But how do you work with other governments to be able to address some of these challenges? Certainly, there are strategic partnerships that can be formed with either the county or the state or other cities, maybe to address some of these regional challenges. So, Georgeanne, why don't we start with you on this one?
I think what's really great about the city manager level is while we all may work in a political environment, we can sort of set that aside with our electeds and pick up the phone, call our colleagues and that are maybe facing the same challenges and just say, hey, how are you handling this? Clovis city manager all the time, the county chief administrative officer all the time. I'm constantly texting them, what are you doing? How are you handling this? Frankly, Visalia, we hear a lot about, oh, well, Visalia does this, Visalia does that. And so the staff will reach out to the staff in Visalia. A lot of times it's on, we're looking at an ag mitigation program. And so we're not shy about it is innovation. Frankly, anything that requires less effort and less money, in my opinion, is innovation. So if that means we can look to our neighboring cities to take a great idea, I'm certainly going to steal Leslie's idea about microchip reading stations, because I was like, oh my God, that's amazing, and was texting my animal center people when we need to do that. So there's no sort of pride of authorship of ideas in the city manager world that I have found. I have colleagues in other parts of the country where I ask, how are you doing this? How are you addressing this? I hear you have a really neat program. So I think that really kind of affords us the ability to find good ideas and try and implement them in our own city. And I always say, why are we reinventing the wheel? What are other cities doing? And it doesn't matter, big, small, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. Most ideas can be scaled. So, maybe a small city, in a city the size of Fresno, it starts small, and we even do pilots within our own city. We may start something with one department and see if it works within our city. And we also, are very blessed. I know, our mayors work very collaboratively and regionally. Fresno and Bakersfield, not Visalia quite yet, are members of the big 13 cities, where the mayors of the largest 13 cities in California meet regularly and get together, and then meet with the state regularly. And I think a perfect example of that is the HAP funding, which is the Homeless Housing Assistance Program. And this is funding that has been provided to jurisdictions to help provide services for homelessness, housing and services for homelessness. We have been receiving several $1 million, at least the city has, for several years now. There's been 6 rounds of HAP funding. The governor's budget proposed 0 funding. And that would have required a lot of us to reduce services in that area. The big 13 cities banded together and pushed back very, very hard on the governor and legislature. And as a result, while the funding had traditionally been about $1 billion statewide, there was in the budget that just got signed, $500 million got put back in. And I think that's a direct result of the efforts of the elected officials to band together. That's more on a statewide level, but certainly affects and can trickle down regionally. So we're very fortunate to have that partnership as well. And then we work at times, the relationship between our city and county has been very tenuous. However, I think that has improved dramatically. And we work really, really hard to keep that relationship in a positive fashion, so that we can find ways to work collaboratively on issues that don't have a border between city and county.
Thanks for that. And Leslie, what about you? What are some examples of that City of Visalia has worked with other local governments or even the state to collaborate and find innovative solutions?
Right. Well, I think there's one that we can all celebrate. It's ongoing, but the whole 99 expansion and the work that our Council of Governments, our counties, and our cities. I was just up at the CTC meeting last week, where I think it was $58 million got appropriated to continue that expansion project. That is one that we have all worked on together. We've put aside kind of the petty differences that can sometimes come up in those big projects, and have really strived to make that a major push in the Valley. And I think that's a good example of what gets done, and people don't even understand the probably decade or more of effort that has taken. You're seeing a lot in transit. I think you're seeing groups come together, and I know in Tulare County, a lot of them have formed a JPA in order to provide that jointly. I think you're going to see more of that. I think by requirement, or just because of the lack of resources, that we're going to have to come together to provide more services. I'll go back to animal control. We provide animal control for 3 cities, or at least the housing for 3 cities, and we provide animal control efforts for 2 of the others through contract. We provide some transit through contract. I think there are other cities and counties who have formed joint dispatch centers, and just the technology is going to make all of that easier. And I think we're all going to, just by necessity is the right word, need to do that together, because staying in and trying to be just very one city trying to do it or itself, or even one county, is just not going to be feasible in the future. But it's sometimes letting go of our own egos. I mean, starting with us, it's just sometimes hard to do that.
Well, that's good to hear. And Christian, what about from the city of Bakersfield's perspective?
Yeah, again, I'll just, tail off of the last comment that I think the economies of scale that we can create are going to be we're going to have to, I agree, we're going to have to do it, because we create value by collaborating that isn't even there. It's like, the sum being greater than, the each of the parts, sort of philosophy is that you can create economies of scale that aren't possible without that collaboration. And I think also, if you can coordinate it across an entire, let's say, region or county, then that alignment also can create a lot of value. And so one other thought I would just add and give it an example is that there's certain things that we're really good at, and there are other things that other folks are good at. And so I try to focus on, let's do the things that we're good at and find partners who are really good at other things. And so we've been very successful with the graffiti team that the city has, and our county hasn't, had that. And our city-county relationships were also tenuous when I got here, and we said, we're going to change that. We're going to work together. And so we actually created this, this joint strategy around graffiti where the county's contracting with us to do graffiti, but we contract with the county to do other pieces that they're better at. And, we've just leaned on one another's strengths. And then from an entrepreneurship standpoint, we had a very fractured ecosystem. We had all these small little entities doing different work around that. And we brought them all together into, not one physical house, but all into one collaboration. But the city and the county, as a large funder, said, hey, we're going to put our money into this, but we want everybody working together. And we've done that at the regional planning level for economic development, as well as to say, we've got city, county, our economic development corporation, all kind of doing the same thing, but not really in alignment. With that stronger alignment, we're much more competitive when it comes to grants and when it comes to making big pitches to potential site selectors.
Thank you. We're going to transition now to the last segment of our conversation, talking about advice for future leaders who are interested in government. And, I'm certainly interested to hear about all of your pathways into now your role, your current roles in government. But we have a lot of students who may be tuning into this either now or afterwards, who are interested in maybe becoming a city manager one day, or maybe they want to work in a city department, work in local government. And so, I'm curious to hear your insights on, what are some of the skills and experiences that are essential for those considering a career in city management. Maybe talk a little bit about your own personal experiences as well. And so, Leslie, why don't we start with you first on this?
Okay. Well, I started in the private sector. I was actually a journalism major, and I came to the city as the first community relations coordinator back many years ago now. And being able to write and to speak in public were two important keys there. Just, and I think in government, oftentimes the leadership roles, those are just imperatives, and almost anything that you come into. Although I do want to talk about, there are good paying jobs, good, stable, steady jobs that are much more blue collar, that are still a wonderful career path that you can really make your way up into. Maybe you don't want to be city manager, but there are other very good roles that we need people in. So I want to talk, both of those are important. For me, it was like just being willing to say yes, to be creative about it, to learn how to be more analytical, because that wasn't my first nature to be. So that I could grow in it. I went back into the private sector for 10 years. I also think that was good. It made me realize what it's like to have to meet that payroll and to be in the private sector. So that coming back, I was really enthused to be back. And I had made my way up through. I came back as the deputy city manager, then the assistant city manager, but had really good experience along the way. So I think being willing to just be creative and not being afraid to tackle whatever the challenge they put before you, and ongoing education. But I don't want to steal all the thunder here, but I think it's also, just let me make the pitch. It's a great industry. Every day you can make a difference in the lives of your citizens. It may be just a little something to them. It is the world to them. And I love that part of local government is, that's where the rubber meets the road and you can make a real difference for your neighbors and friends.
Thank you for that. Christian, what about you? Why don't we get your perspective?
I would agree with everything that Leslie shared. I would also agree that there is a lot of purpose in the work. There are challenges, I think, to be sure. It's become, I think, an increasingly challenging career because of some of the tensions around the political polarization. But our job is to try and stay beneath that and focus on administration implementation. You do have to navigate that, but there is great purpose in this career. A couple of things I would just add to the list. I think the being analytical was mentioned, very important. But I think wanting to build up some skill sets around financial capacity, financial awareness. There's a responsibility to look at all budgets, across an organization and really understand, how that. I think that's also where the rubber meets the road, is where we allocate our resources. And then I would actually add in, and it may be a sort of a skill set that's not often termed, but I call it a tolerance for ambiguity, meaning you have to be able to kind of live in some of these gray spaces. Things are not always black and white. And a lot of what we do is finding balance between competing interests. And so, but that's democracy actually in action. And so it's not a bad thing. It's actually, I think, a really good thing that we look at all these different ideas, and it's coming from the community and from the council and stakeholders and even staff. We have to navigate all that space to find what's the best outcome for the highest number of folks that's in balance with those different interests. But I think there is a skill set in being willing to kind of, or that's a competency of kind of being willing to live in that space, and a skill set for navigating and finding, kind of what is that right balance. And I would also just argue that I think folks have to have a little bit of patience coming in to be willing to navigate in that space. And the last one I would put out there is also learning some of these, maybe it might even just be techniques or attitudes to not take things personally and to have a little bit of a thick skin, knowing that people just are passionate and we can embrace their passion, but not, have it feel like it's about us. It's just about the issue that they really, feel is important to them.
Thank you. And Georgeanne, we'll wrap up with you before we go to audience questions. What about your experience, and what advice do you have for folks who want to get involved in local government?
I have, I'm almost 25 years now at the city of Fresno. And I think what comes to mind is like, you have to be a utility player. You can't put yourself in any one corner, even though you might have a strength or an interest in one particular area. You have to be willing and not intimidated or fearful of diving into other issues that you may have absolutely zero experience in. I, kind of call it being fearless. That's what my staff sometimes says. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad that it looks that way. But yes, occasionally I sit back and, the mayor and I are having a glass of wine. And I said, I had no idea what I'm doing on this issue. A lot of it, I think, like, it has to come from what kind of your foundational principles are. So, right. So integrity, mission driven, hardworking, ethical. And I think if you have those and grit, and if you have those, I think then your intuition is can always lead you in the right direction. And I know that's sort of esoteric, But I have found, as I look at my team around me, people who possess some of those skill sets or competencies, I think, are the most successful. And you have to be a good communicator. I think with the newer generations, I personally have seen within our own city workforce, a hesitancy for personal communication. I think we have a generation that was raised on texting, and it's not always easy to do business via text message. When you're having to deal with people, businesses, and constituents, you have to pick up the phone, or you have to have an in-person meeting. You have to be able to communicate. So I think that is a really important skill set as well, because I think that shows that that you care and you're interested in solving problems. And another thing, problem solving. I think everything I do every day involves solving a problem or settling a crisis. I always say I don't feel like I manage the city. I feel like I manage the crisis of the day. I wish that I could do a lot more proactive management. I think, the time that we do that for me is really about budget season. That's the time that we're most strategic and most thoughtful and most proactive, as opposed to the day-to-day, especially in a city the size of Fresno. There's just an issue every single day that's going to come up. That's going to be a crisis that you have to, move quickly and think quickly. And I think a lot is to be said for not taking things personally and having a thick skin. I can tell you that's an area that I have focused on personal growth. I feel like I've gotten better at that because out of necessity. If not, I think I wouldn't be able to get the job done. If I had to worry about every little thing that was said or people's opinion or, social media comments or comments on, webpage from people who may not have all the facts, kind of have to block out all of that and just kind of put your head down and get the work done. And I think in order to be able to do that, you have to be really self-motivated and mission-driven. It's every once in a while, I catch myself where I'm like really upset about something because something didn't go the way I wanted it to go, or the plan didn't, it didn't go. And I always have to step back and say, this isn't about me. This isn't about me. This is about the employee. This is about this elected official. This is about the public, like what's most important for them. And, having a great team around me, I think helps keep that in check. We are all really, really focused on the outcome. But I think, you just have to be willing to roll your sleeves up and do whatever needs to be done. There's no such thing as a job description. I mean, there is, but you don't stick to it. I do things all the time where people say, why are you doing that? And I'm like, well, because I need to understand. I need to understand it firsthand. I'm not going to sit up and make a decision, without understanding really intuitively what is involved in this particular problem. So I have a lot of hope. I think, city manager world is far different than people who may aspire for public office, in my opinion. I think the motivations are far different. And I am always really, really pleased when I hear someone who's like, I'm really interested in being in the city manager world or being in a department director. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this. Tell me more. And there are so many opportunities in city government, so many. And the growth opportunities in government are huge. And just like Leslie said, especially in a full service city, there's tremendous opportunity. So I would encourage anybody who possesses those things internally that may make a good, good fit for someone who really just wants to improve their community to look at their cities as an opportunity for employment.
Well, thank you both for your insights. And also, I appreciated Christian's insights as well. Hopefully, maybe we'll get him back here in a second. But we will now move to our questions from the audience. We have a few questions that were submitted from the audience, just about, various, some are directed to you individually, and then some are just more general. So let's start with this one for question for Leslie with the City of Visalia. So this question says, the Civic Center has been in the works for decades, and now that construction is finally moving forward, what made this the right time to invest in it? And what are some specific challenges or goals that this project is meant to address for the community?
So it is a Civic Center project. It's phase 2, which will encompass council chambers, a public safety building, and then evidence and crime lab facilities. So especially crime lab and evidence facilities, it is especially a technology and a space need in and of itself. Same with our council chambers. Our council chambers was built in 1957. I think it holds 68 people if the fire department, turns their head a little bit. We've simply outgrown that. We are also very fragmented in how our city offices are throughout the community, so that we don't get that synergy that comes from being in the same building, being close together, where you can catch each other in the hallway or just have that synergy that comes from it. So it has been something that has been more than 40 years in the making. When I first came to the city, they said, you'll be in a new city hall in 5 years. That was a very long time ago. So it has been something that councils, they purchased the land for that about 25 years ago. I began to assemble it, if not even actually a little longer than that. And they've been saving for it for decades, so that this phase 2 we will actually pay cash for. And it begins to it is very definitely an infill project that is adjacent to our East Downtown, which is an area that has lots of potential for growth and development and economic impact throughout our community. So there's multiple benefits, and it is I think a beautiful design that will have a real sense of presence and be a community gathering place. So I think it's a very positive thing to come.
Thank you. It certainly sounds very exciting for the city. We'll move to this next question for the city of Fresno. Georgeanne, you mentioned this briefly, but the governor's budget included $100 million for downtown Fresno. How is the city deciding and prioritizing which projects get done first?
So when we submitted the request to the state 2 years ago, it was for $250 million for infrastructure. So there was a plan that was put together at that time. Most of it is for infrastructure. And what we have found is, we have the need to put a lot of people in our downtown in order to fulfill all of our obligations under our general plan, under our housing element. But the problem is, we've been talking about downtown revitalization for decades. And really, when push comes to shove, with the elimination of redevelopment agencies some time ago, it's very difficult for the private sector to get financing for a project in our downtown. And because we don't have that critical mass yet, there's always a gap. We always have so much interest in building projects in downtown, but when traditional commercial financing is sought, it's very difficult to get the financing. So what we decided to do is, instead of putting the cost of improving the 100-year-old infrastructure on developer by developer, we decided to go in and improve that infrastructure ourselves. So that helps take that cost off of the private sector's pro forma and hopefully makes their project more marketable for commercial financing. In addition, so we've got sewer, water infrastructure replacement going on all throughout our downtown right now. And then also parking structures. We have 2 parking structures that are going to be invested in. One in the northern part of our downtown in conjunction with the Housing Authority and a substantial housing development that they are submitting a tax credit application for. And then also up by our stadium, Chuck Chansey Stadium. So that will also help buy down the cost of housing projects in downtown, because you have to have some level of parking for projects. And if that cost is not put onto the developer entirely, then it helps buy down the cost. And then there are some other smaller line items. We are looking at a small revolving loan fund for short-term construction financing, possibly to help fill the gaps on some projects as well. So the plan was put together initially on what we asked for, and it was all about catalytic investment to promote housing in downtown Fresno. That was what we sold to the state, and that's what we intend to deliver on.
And I think our last question, then we can wrap up our conversation that we have, is I'm a current federal employee. I'm looking to switch to local government. I have 22 years of federal service. How can I get my foot in the door in local government? And why don't we start with Leslie on this one?
Sure. First of all, apply. Go onto our website, go into the government jobs website, and look at what we have available and how that would match with your current skills and abilities. We'd also love to have just a call. We'll be glad to set up a meeting. Let me talk with you and find out, because there may be jobs that have an odd name in city government that you may not even realize really interact with your skills and abilities, whether it's with us or somebody else. We may be able to help make that connection. So somebody with 22 years of experience has got definitely, I would assume, some very good skills and abilities that are going to be a welcome resource in a local government.
And Georgeanne, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I would say always start with the website. We have job postings that are up every single day. And we also post our job specifications. So if there is an open job, you're not quite sure what that title may mean, you can go in and look at the specification, and it'll say what the job duties are. It'll say what the minimum requirements are. Most of our jobs in the city are civil service. And so depending on whether it's a blue collar or a management or supervisory job, there may be some sort of testing process that you have to go through, but everybody has to start somewhere, and I always say there's tremendous growth opportunity. So maybe you may have to start a level below where you were at the federal system, but there is constantly opportunities to move up in the organization, especially in a city as large as ours. There are opportunities every single day that open up, and I think it's a great opportunity. It was a rough time for us, certainly for a while, for recruiting. We were all fighting over the same small candidate pool. I feel like since the reduction of remote work opportunities at the state and federal level, where those jobs are being called back in, I definitely have seen a lot more applicants coming over from the state and federal government who, maybe want to be a little bit closer to home or closer to affordable, living opportunities. But start on the website. That's always a great place. Or you can even walk into City Hall to our human resources counter, and those jobs are posted in that department as well.
If I could too, I think probably on both our websites or every government, all our job specifications are posted there. So you can kind of scan them and look at them. You can also file an interest card. So maybe the job you really want isn't open today, but you can fill out that interest card online. And if and when it does become available, it will ping you, and so that you know and can look at it then.
Well, those sound like great tools and definitely great insights for folks who want to transition into local government. That's all we have for today. I thank you so much to you, Georgeanne, and you, Leslie, and also to Christian with the City of Bakersfield for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your insights. And we've had a fantastic conversation this morning. Thank you to our audience for your engagement, your thoughtful questions. We hope this panel has sparked some new ideas, maybe to other local government officials who've been watching, or also future leaders who are interested in local government. I encourage you, we were talking about websites, to also please visit the Maddie Institute's website at themaddieInstitute.org. And once again, thanks for joining us. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.